Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our podcast. My name is Chris.
And my name is James.
And we're the Formula One Bros.
Just two twins with a love of F1 to share our thoughts on everything in the world of Formula One.
And we are back after a little bit of time off for some crazy work schedules to talk about
broken laptops.
Talk about everything involving the Miami Grand Prix, the second ever race in Miami around I don't even know what the circuit's called, but
I don't know.
It's in Miami. And
I call it the Miami Dolphins racetrack.
Yeah.
That's because it's right around the stadium where the Miami Dolphins play football.
Yep.
American football.
And
the real football. I'm just kidding. I don't want to make my European followers angry.
So another race in Miami. This was race number 5 of the season. So we're 5 races away. We have 17 left, well on into the season. So lots of stuff about this weekend was really interesting. And I think it was particularly the first time that we saw a really jumbled up qualifying grid.
Yeah, it was really cool. I unfortunately could not watch qualifying because of working and in my work schedule. But I looked at the results, and then I watched the recap, and I was like, oh my gosh! Well, at first I looked at the results, and I was like, what happened? And then I watched the recap, and it was a really, really good qualifying.
Yeah.
And so that kind of goes into my first takeaway of the race, at least up towards the front of the race. It was pretty boring, at least in the front of the race. Once Max Verstappen, once Red Bull kind of got settled into 1-2, it was a pretty boring race. But there was a lot of overtakes and passing and strategy going on in the midfield, which was really cool, and a lot of surprises where, like for example, Charles was getting passed by a Haas, and Lewis Hamilton was battling with also a Haas. But it really made for wasn't a really action-packed race, but there were like little things that were going on all throughout the race. There weren't any like DNFs or anything like that. There weren't any safety cars, virtual safety cars, no retirements. It was, what did they say? It was the last time that we had no DNFs in a race. It was the last time we raced in Turkey, which was in 2021.
20. It was when,
2020.
No, it was 21.
It was 21, yeah.
21.
So that was the last time we had a race where we didn't have any DNFs. So it was kind of like, it was boring, but also it wasn't. But it was kind of boring, but it wasn't. So yeah, it was very interesting.
Yeah, I think going back to the qualifying, I think the biggest thing that the couple takeaways that I have from qualifying that also kind of go into the race is the track conditions this weekend were particularly difficult. I think a lot of drivers were complaining about track and how difficult it was. It was very slippery. It was chewing up tires, particularly for Ferrari. It was chewing up tires. A lot of people really just not able to kind of get a handle on the tire setup specifically. But I think the other thing too that leads me to believe is it confirms for me is just how tight the midfield battle is. Hello, Cannoli. It's so tight, and I think I mentioned this on the previous podcast that I don't feel like there are any back markers this year.
Yeah,
like,
I feel that too.
Williams is competitive. They can go out and compete for points. Alex Albon qualified P11.
Yeah.
And they can take advantage of teams and drivers that when misfortune falls upon them.
And even Kevin Magnussen, Haas 2 years ago was a back marker, and even Kevin Magnussen put his car P4 for the race.
So and the midfield is just increasingly difficult to tell where the pecking order is.
It's all very close.
Which is I think half of the goal of what these regulations are achieving. And I think I will say with how limited the action is this year compared to last year. It seems I'm noticing a trend, and this was a confirmation of that trend.
Yeah,
that overtaking rate seems down. We're producing less like really good high action races, because last year was a great season. Even though it was Max Verstappen dominant throughout the season, it was a great season. There was lots of overtakes, and it's because I think these teams are starting to recover downforce, and downforce means that it's harder to overtake. And the tire construction this year, for whatever reason, is not allowing them. It's not enough variation in strategy.
I think
the hards this weekend were only, I think, in the middle of at peak performance, the hards were only like 2 or 3 tenths a lap slower than the mediums.
Yeah,
and because of that, at one point the hards were faster over a longer stint than the mediums, which is why Max Verstappen was able to do what he did, because he started on hards. So
yeah, and I think another part of it too is last year, at least with the car development, we saw so many different philosophies, and there are a lot of different shapes, looks, everything going on with the cars. But now this year, all the teams have had a full season of, okay, what works, what doesn't work. And now we're seeing a lot more teams kind of adopt one style of development or the other. And a lot of them are copying Red Bull. A lot of teams are starting to copy Red Bull. Some variations on, but overall, the gist of it is they're all kind of starting to come together, and that can potentially lead to less overtaking.
Yeah, unless you're Ferrari or Mercedes. But I think even those teams are realizing that they're on the wrong development path.
Yeah, but Red Bull got it right, and I think a lot of the other top teams also got it right. And I heard something very interesting. Christian Horner, in an interview this weekend, Christian Horner was asked, I can't remember what the question was, but he said, he was like, yeah, we had pretty much just a normal winter of development, but where's everyone else? And someone asked him and said, well, you guys have less air tunnel time, all that kind of stuff. Do you think that towards the end of the season, the other teams will start to catch up? And Christian Horner believes that he absolutely thinks that teams will catch up, because they're very, very particular with what's going to be upgraded. And already teams like Ferrari, Mercedes, McLaren, even Aston Martin are bringing a lot of upgrades. And even this weekend, Ferrari brought some upgrades. A bunch of teams are bringing some upgrades for Imola, which is the next race we have, and then even more for Monaco, and then even more for Spain. Red Bull right now doesn't have a whole lot of upgrades in the pipeline. So I really do think that the gap from Red Bull will start to kind of creep up as the season goes on. And who knows? We might have a crazy awesome end to the year.
Well, and we saw that with Mercedes in the past too, where they have these incredibly dominant car, and week to week, month to month, even season to season, when the regulations were stable, you didn't see a whole lot of change in those cars. And a lot of the development that they had, or a lot of the advantage that they had, is because in 2014 they came out of the box and they had the best car. They had a platform that they understood right away. And by the time that teams started to catch up to where they were at, they were already a year or two ahead. So it sort of cemented the pecking order. And I think that's sort of where we're getting to with other teams. Like Aston Martin has sort of figured it out, and they're taking advantage of having much more wind tunnel time than Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull, and even some of their other teams. Now that will change once we get to July 1st and it switches over to the current constructor or this year's constructor standings versus last year's. Yeah. But, Red Bull, and this is what Toto Wolff had mentioned, and with Mercedes, that even if this Imola upgrade works, and even if they put in a lot of work, the Imola upgrade works, they understand the car more, and they put in a lot of work over the off season, Red Bull's still going to have a 2-year advantage.
Yeah.
And same thing with Ferrari. So that gap, I think will lessen, but the pecking order I don't see changing for a very long time. Now, that also depends on the ceiling of the platform of this car. You know, how far is that ceiling, and how close can we get to achieving that? And how quickly can other teams who are behind the 8 ball, like Ferrari, Mercedes, and Aston Martin, how quickly can they catch up? So I think that'll be really interesting to see over the next couple seasons. But back to Miami, these are all trends that we've noticed because of the start of the season that were accentuated in Miami.
Yeah.
And my last sort of takeaway is that this weekend took another turn in the where do I see these three teams that are all vying for second place. Where do I see that advantage? And in Baku, it looked like, you know, Aston Martin right now look convincingly second place, but it looked like Ferrari was right there. And this week, you know, it completely changed. Ferrari had a lot of struggles, and then Mercedes, which I'll get on to Mercedes in a little bit, but they finished 30 and 50 seconds off the lead, even though their results were 4th and 6th, which on paper is a great result. But, you know, and then you had, and Fernando Alonso had a great performance, but, you know, Lance Stroll started 18th, but he only got up to 12th, you know, and he was stuck in that midfield. He wasn't able to make a big impression like we've seen him and Fernando be able to do in other races. Yeah. So it just is a really interesting weekend for those teams, and I still don't quite know, because they're all better than each other in different areas. Like Ferrari is the quickest over 1 lap. Yeah. But
and their straight line speed's pretty good too.
But yeah, and then Aston Martin is best over the long run. Yeah. And Mercedes is always kind of somewhere there in the middle. So it's just a really, really interesting thing, and this was another weekend where I don't know who has the advantage. And it looked like last weekend, like Haas and Alpine were behind the 8 ball, but they both had great weekends. Yeah, they did. And Williams looked a little bit down on pace this weekend, and McLaren looked like they had a great Baku weekend, but they struggled this weekend. So it's just another weekend where I don't really know, and I think it's not really going to be until probably middle of the summer when we get into some of the European races, like around, you know, Canada, Austria, you know, those races where we really start to figure out where the pecking order was. Yep. So those are some of my takeaways. I also just think that's a tough track to overtake.
Yeah. I also think, at least because the race was interesting. I wouldn't say it was exciting, but it was interesting. But I felt like all of the really action-packed stuff from the weekend happened before the race. You know, the practice sessions, a lot of people, you know, making mistakes, and qualifying the order of the starting grid was all mixed up, and that made for really exciting qualifying, really exciting end to qualifying. And even the build up to the race was like all the celebrities, all the pomp and circumstance with everything going on with the race. It was really, really cool. And even the driver announcements, I was like, I was watching the race with Laura, and I was like, man, this is really kind of similar to like Austin 2017. And I showed her the video, and she was like, oh, that's really cool. So I thought it was cool. I thought the last year it kind of felt forced, kind of gimmicky, but this year it was cool. It felt less gimmicky. Yeah, this year. Hey, buddy.
Yeah. So that's pretty much everything about the race. I think we'll get into a lot more detail here. So we'll just go ahead and start getting into grading all of the teams. So first up, we go in reverse constructor championship order, which right now it seems to kind of be leveling out in the same kind of place. But right now, starting us off, 10th place in constructors currently is Williams.
Back at the bottom. Dang. You hate to see it. This weekend, I'm going to give them a C-. I'm going to give them a C-. It wasn't a very exciting weekend for them. It wasn't a really impressive weekend for them. I was really kind of disappointed, especially with Logan being, with it being his home race. Literally lives in Florida. Not too far. I can't remember.
He's from Fort Lauderdale,
which is like
40. It's like a 40-minute drive.
Yeah,
and I know that the airports are 40-minute drive apart.
Yeah.
Don't ask me how I know that.
I think they mentioned like he lives like south of Fort Lauderdale, so I think it was it's like a 20-minute drive. But anyway, and I was really disappointed with them. I've been really impressed with them so far this season, but I was disappointed from Williams this weekend. So I'm going to give them a C-.
I think this weekend for them was exceptionally average because and I was thinking about this on paper. Alex Albon qualified 11th, finished 14th, which means he lost 3 places. But there were 3 people behind him that were out of position. Lance Stroll, Yuki Tsunoda, and Lewis Hamilton were all out of position. And they all were the 3 drivers that passed him in the race. So if those 3 drivers got an accurate what I would imagine would be an accurate representation from qualifying. Yeah. I think Alex Albon qualified and ended up right where he needed to be. So for him, I think actually it was, on paper, it didn't look like it, but I actually think it was a relatively positive weekend for Alex Albon. The same can't be said, though, for Logan Sergeant, and I think he's going to be a little bit disappointed in 20th place. But I will say, all 3 rookies finished at the bottom. Nick DeVries, Oscar Piastri, and Logan Sergeant all finished at the bottom. And I think that just goes to show how tough the learning curve is in Formula One because it's a new track that they've never been to. And
F2 doesn't race at Miami.
And it's not the first one that they don't race at that we've been to. Actually, the only one that F2 has raced at that we've been to so far has been Bahrain.
Yeah.
But the track conditions were so tricky.
Yeah, and they had resurfaced the track too. Yeah, they
resurfaced. It was slick, and in the race, it poured the night before, so it washed away all the rubber. It's what we call in the States with like NASCAR and IndyCar. It was a green track. There was no rubber laid down, so everybody's first stints, especially on the mediums, was really tricky. And that goes into one of the reasons why I think Sergio Perez wasn't able to keep Max Verstappen behind was
because he was on the mediums.
He mentioned that his stint on the mediums was not where he wanted it to be.
Yeah, I think that was the case for everyone. I think,
but so it was tough. It was tricky, and I think I just think of those 3 teams, I think that ended up being the pecking order where I see all of those teams where the rookies ended up. So I don't want to be too hard on them, but I think Logan Sergeant will definitely be disappointed with 20th place, mainly just because it's his home track. And compared to the performance of his teammate, he was behind his teammate all weekend. Yeah. He was down and pretty much 18, 19, 20, pretty much all weekend. So I think it's just a tough weekend, and I think he's going to be looking forward to Imola.
Yeah. So what's the grade that you give?
I give them a C+.
C+.
And I think mainly just because of Alex Albon's performance was, I think, a lot better than the stat sheet has us believe. Yeah. And I also just think that Williams is continuing to prove that there are no back markers this year. And I think it's going to change drastically from track to track. Like Imola is a track that Williams has been good at, particularly, at the hands of George Russell in 2021, fighting for points before his wreck with Valtteri Bottas. Yeah. But, I think they'll be looking forward to going back to Imola. I think, so I give them a C+. Alex Albon's performance was good. I mean, P11 in qualifying, that has to be a positive thing, especially, especially when you have Lewis Hamilton and Yuki Tsunoda and Lance Stroll not executing where they could be. Yeah.
All starting behind you.
all starting behind you. And I think, would he have liked to have kept those people behind him?
Yeah.
Yes. But, when you're going up against Lewis Hamilton in a Mercedes, that's, there's only so much you can do.
Yeah.
So I give them a C+ on the weekend.
That's fair.
And that takes us to AlphaTauri is up next. My biggest thing that I have to say
Go for it.
For AlphaTauri is Yuki Tsunoda comes away P11 after starting. I can't remember where he started. It's like P14, 15, somewhere around there. I'll have it in front of me.
Yeah, it was a good drive for Yuki.
Good drive. That's 6 races. If we include Abu Dhabi 2022, 6 races he's either finished 10th or 11th.
Yeah.
So the consistency that he's starting to show is great.
Consistent. And I think that more speaks for the car. Can't really do much more than that.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that is about the maximum where that car can go. And there is this clip that was doing the rounds on TikTok that I saw that of Yuki Tsunoda just like absolutely going for it in the braking zones on the opening lap. Like he was confident. And I think we're really starting to see Yuki come into his own. I think he's starting to establish himself as a little bit of a team player. And so from my perspective, for Yuki Tsunoda, that was about as good of a weekend as you can have.
Yeah, it was good.
But
it was good.
I think on the other side of the garage, I said that so British. On the other side of the garage.
We're American.
On the other side of the garage, Nick DeVries, I think particularly had a rough weekend.
Yeah, he did.
When you consider qualifying, he actually out-qualified Tsunoda, which was good, but the race was so tricky, he ended up P18.
Yeah.
Ahead of only Oscar Piastri and Logan Sergeant, the other 2 rookies. So I think that's a really tough weekend. And so if you're looking at just Yuki Tsunoda's performance,
a weekend.
I mean, you have to ignore qualifying. I give them a B+. But if you're looking at, Nick DeVries, it's different. So I think it balances out. I average it out to about a C.
Yeah, I was going to say
C+.
I was going to say CC-, but yeah, that you're absolutely right. I think that's a really, really good way of looking at it. Just combine because it's the whole weekend. So I think I agree with your rating.
Cool. That takes us to
quick and easy.
Alfa Romeo, which had a stellar qualifying, but their race was not as good. I mean, Valtteri Bottas, mega job to put it, P10 in qualifying.
Yeah, I saw that. I was like, wow, that's the first time Alfa Romeo's qualified and gotten to Q3 this year.
And honestly, I don't think he would have been higher than P10. Him and Max Verstappen were the only 2 that weren't able to put in a representative lap time because of Leclerc's crash.
Yeah.
But I think he was still able to put a P10. I don't think he would have been higher than that, but still putting it in Q3, Alfa Romeo looks a little bit tougher to drive this year compared to last year.
Which, wow, my 4th place prediction for them is not looking good at all.
And I mean, that's also, you also made that prediction before Aston Martin dropped their car.
I know.
So I'll forgive you on that one. But yikes. I think it's so interesting because they had a great qualifying, but their race was not as good.
Yeah.
And it's just another team that I just feel very average about, and I'll give them I give them a C.
Yeah.
I feel very average about them. I think
I would agree. Agree with that.
I think Valtteri Bottas particularly had a tough time in the race, but
yeah, it was a good qualifying for them, but the race wasn't that great. So I think a C is a good.
Yeah. So that takes us next to Haas, and if you're Haas, that's a dream weekend compared to the start that you had
absolutely
at the early part of the season. It's your home race. It's the team's home race. Kevin Magnussen P4 in qualifying. Yeah. I mean, even putting that car in Q3 was impressive, but a great effort from the team all around.
And then Kevin Magnussen, he started he dropped 6 places, but he still finished 10th.
Yeah,
He's still 10th.
Finished in the points, taking their point total from 7 to 8.
Where did Nico Hülkenberg finish? I don't even know where he started the race. But yeah, it was
15 or something.
It was a really, really good weekend for Haas. They had been kind of the down there along with McLaren kind of at the back, and I think they were up until this weekend. They were last. So Kevin Magnussen 10, 15. Yeah, Nico Hülkenberg finished 15th.
Yeah.
Which is better than what they have been doing. So I give him a B plus on the weekend.
Yeah.
It was really, really. I'd even give him an A minus for the weekend.
I'm going to give them a B minus just because I think Nico probably would have wanted a little bit more out of that weekend, given Kevin Magnussen's performance. But Kevin Magnussen is the person that, like, when he can pull out a lap, he can pull out a lap, and he's quick. And I mean, there's so many memorable points, I mean, in his tenure at Haas. I mean, you think of him and Roman Grosjean getting 4th and 5th in Belgium in 2018. You think of his P5 lap in Austria in 2019.
In a horrible car.
Yeah, you think of him being the only person that was able to score points in that car in 2020.
In Hungary.
In Hungary. I mean, and he's the kind of person, I mean, that when he can pull out a lap, he can pull out a lap.
Yeah.
So I really do think that, I mean, and pole in Brazil. How can we forget that? Pole in Brazil last year. So, Kevin Magnussen is quick over one lap, is good. I think that's the Haas car traditionally has been much better in qualifying than in the race. So that's something that
So are all the Ferrari.
I mean, all of the Ferrari power cars are like that, and that's because Alfa Romeo and Haas, they take their gearboxes, because they take their gearboxes, power unit obviously, but gearboxes. That whole power unit gearbox assembly, that affects their rear suspension, that affects it and everything. And so they have the same tire limitation that Ferrari does. And so they're much better in qualifying than in the races. But overall, I'm going to give them a B minus. I think I'm going to be a little bit harsher on them just because of Nico Hülkenberg's performance.
That's
but
fair.
Still much better performance this weekend than last weekend. And you gotta admit that.
Yeah.
Up next, we actually have a tie between Alpine and McLaren, both at 14 points in the constructors, but Alpine is listed as 6 because they haven't had as high of a finishing position as McLaren has had this year. But double points for them. What a way to turn around
8th and 9th.
Yeah, what a way to turn around that weekend compared to Baku. Their Baku weekend was horrendous.
Yeah, not good.
And this week it was a huge turnaround. Pierre Gasly 5th in qualifying, like that is a mega effort. And he, I think, I think Esteban Ocon has had the measure of Pierre Gasly so far this season. But that qualifying effort, what order did they finish? Gasly finished ahead of him in the race too.
Yeah.
So Gasly hits back in that teammate battle. So I give them. I'll
give them an A minus.
I give them an A minus. And the interesting thing about Alpine is when they are at their peak, I think they can attach themselves to the back of that group of 3 teams that are vying for second place. Given Aston Martin has 102 points and they only have 14 right now, I don't think that they can fight for second in the constructors, but they can. When that car is at its peak, they can fight with Mercedes and Ferrari. But the peaks are few and far between, as we saw with Baku. So, it'll be really
Who knows,
interesting.
that may be the only race this season that they have double points finish.
I don't know. And so that'll be an interesting thing to see throughout the season is how they develop and how where that car goes.
Yeah,
because that car, I mean, we've seen the past several seasons, Alpine has come on much stronger in the second half of the season than they have in the first half.
Yeah, and their Alpine CEO Laurent Rossi came out and said, the trajectory, talking about their development, the trajectory is not good. We need to fix the mindset of the team as soon as possible. Otmar Safnauer was Otmar was brought in to steer the team. It's his mission to turn the team around. And this year there are a lot of excuses which lead to poor performance. So it's gave a very, very bleak outlook on the team, which
is interesting.
Understandable why Fernando Alonso left.
Yeah, so that's interesting.
I don't blame him.
That's interesting because that comment, I think, is a really stark, like a huge shot across the bow, especially even going right up to Otmar Safnauer. It was like it was at every level of this team was being criticized in that comment. Yeah. So that was interesting, number one. What makes it even more interesting was how good of a weekend that they had.
I know, especially after the weekend that they had.
If he had said that after Baku, I'd have been like, fair play.
Makes sense.
Makes sense. But the fact that came off of the back of such a great weekend, and I'm wondering if that came out just because he realized what this team's potential. This weekend made them realize what this team's potential can be, and it is interesting. This team has been, it's been championship contender in 5 years, every season since they came back into the sport in 2016.
Yeah,
so it's been championship contending team in 5 years for the past 8 years. 7, 8 seasons. So I can understand why that comment is happening, and knowing that they've had several high profile drivers leave for other teams.
Yeah.
Makes sense. I think when Daniel Ricciardo made the decision to leave Renault and move to McLaren, I could understand why he made that decision. And a little less so with Fernando Alonso, but knowing what we know now about Alfa Romeo, I can definitely understand why.
You mean Aston Martin?
Yeah, Aston Martin, sorry. So it's really interesting. Yeah. And so, but they always come on stronger in the second half of the season. So it'll be interesting to see where they go.
We'll see what happens.
Up next is McLaren. And this was not the weekend that they would have wanted.
Yeah.
They struggled in qualifying, both out in Q2, a pointless weekend for them, especially coming off the back of Baku, where they had a much stronger weekend. And I think that's just, again, it's a car that struggles with the condition. It's wind sensitive. Yeah. It was very windy in Miami this week.
Yep. And I'm going to give them a D.
Yeah, I'm going to give them a D. It's a peaky car. Fans. It's a peaky car. It's wind sensitive. It chews through tires. All the problems that this track accentuate they have.
Yeah.
And so I think it was just a tough weekend. They always go strong at Imola. Lando Norris ended up on the podium last year. So, I think Imola will be a better weekend for them, but this will be one that they want to move on from.
Yeah, for sure.
Up next, 4th place, we have Ferrari. And right off the bat, I'm going to give them a D as well.
I was going to say C-. Yeah, I was going to say C-. C- or D. Yeah, they just, even in the practice sessions, they didn't look like they weren't having great practice sessions. And then, qualifying where they did, Charles in 7th, and Charles several times over this weekend, spun the car off the track, and this was also a weekend that was very, very difficult for them, and one that they're going to want to forget.
Yeah, and again, that car is so fast over one lap. I mean, Carlos Sainz put it P3 in qualifying, and he even said that when he was asked if he had anything more, and he said, I had everything left. I had so much more to give, but he wasn't able to put in that second lap because of Charles's crash. So, and the red flag that ended the session early. So, there was so much promise, but that car just chews through tires like they're jello, and it's really, as a Ferrari fan, it's frustrating, but also as a fan of the sport, it's frustrating to see because you never want to see a team happen like that. I mean, it's the same problem that Mercedes is in right now. It sucks to watch teams. Yeah,
especially teams that historically have been so dominant for so long.
Yeah. So it's frustrating to watch.
Yeah. Especially as Ferrari fans.
I will say, I do want to talk about Charles real quick because he's kind of prone to these high pressure mistakes when he feels like when he feels like there's no pressure on him and he feels at one with the car, everything's working. He is capable of being the fastest person in Formula One, faster than Max Verstappen, clearly because of his pole in Baku, and other qualifying performances that he's had. I mean, I'm thinking P4 in Bahrain in 2020. Like, that is insane. He is capable of some of the most impressive qualifying laps. I'm hesitant to say that he can't maintain it in the race because Ferrari has had this problem with tires ever since he's been in Formula One. Let's look back at Belgium 2019. He was pole leading. Well, even let's go before that. Let's look at Austria. He was the fastest person all weekend. Practice, qualifying, and then it came to the race, and Max Verstappen was able to catch him because that Red Bull was able to make the tires last. He and Leclerc struggled with his tires and was not able to maintain the lead and keep the win. Then we look at Belgium. He won, but Mercedes was catching him. And same thing happened in Italy. So ever since he's been in Formula One, even going back to his first wins, I mean, we look at the pole in Russia, and he ended up P3 in 2019. So we look at all of those things, and that car, and I'm convinced that it's the car. It's not, because Sebastian Vettel suffered the same fates. So that car has a problem. And it has had a problem, and I'm wondering, because the head of vehicle concept, David Sanchez, is going over to McLaren. I'm wondering, they've had a lot of high-profile technical people that have changed over. I'm wondering if they do some recruiting, which is rumored that Fred Vasseur has a couple great hires tapped in from Red Bull. They're just working out contract negotiations and whether or not Red Bull can release them when they need them, when Ferrari needs them. But the car has a problem, and when Charles is at one with the car, he's great, but when he's not, he overdrives. He has this tendency to overdrive, and that is what happened this weekend, I think. So I'm going to be harsh on Ferrari, and I'm going to give them a D.
I do want to talk about Ferrari, though, and I had made a TikTok video about this, and it was at the start of the weekend. Carlos made a comment in an interview where he said something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing because I don't have the quote directly in front of me, but he said something along the lines of the attitude and determination back in Maranello is one that he has never seen from the team before, especially since he's been in the team. And everyone is very outright in saying, yes, we are not happy. Here are all the things that need to be done. When all of the shuffling at the higher ups of Ferrari, all the high ups leaving, and everyone was like, oh my God, this is the end of Ferrari. All those higher ups are leaving. I was one of the few people who came out and said, hold on a minute. Maybe this is a good thing.
Yeah.
Maybe this is a good thing, because Ferrari has been a crap team for so long with all of those people leading it. Maybe now that all of those people are leaving, they can start to turn the tide and start to turn the team around. And Carlos came out, and Charles has said it too, that and even Fred has said it, that this is a different team and they know exactly what needs to be done, and they're not sugarcoating anything, and just the attitude is completely different at the team. And I think it may not happen this season,
It
probably won't because they're kind of locked into the concept of the car. But maybe towards the end of the season and the start of next season, we will start to see Ferrari benefit from the fruits of that labor.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited for the future of Ferrari.
That's a different attitude than we've seen traditionally from Ferrari. And the reason, real quick sidebar, the reason why I say it's not going to happen this year is because aerodynamic change. If they were to bring in a B spec car essentially and change it over to the aerodynamic philosophy of Red Bull, it changes so many things. The reason why the Red Bull works so well is because the suspension works with with the aero, works with the chassis, like everything is integrated. And so that's why I don't think it's going to change this year, but maybe next year. The thing that I want to say about Ferrari is traditionally when that team, and this is no slight to Italians, but when that team is internally run by Ferrari, like Italian Ferrari personnel, that team has not been nearly as successful. I mean, you think about the most successful period of Ferrari was when Michael Schumacher, a German person, was their number one driver. Their team principal was Jean Todt, who is French, and their technical head was Ross Brawn, who's British.
Yeah.
So when non-Italians are running the team, that team is really, really good. And I understand why they want to have. It's the
Italian team.
It's the Italian car. It's like a religion to them. So I understand.
You think of Italian cars. You think of Ferrari and Lamborghini.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And historically, when you think of historic Italian cars, you only think of Ferrari. So I think having an Italian influence on that team is good and necessary, and I see why. But there's too much bureaucracy involved with the car company, and it holds the F1 team back. If Fred is successful bringing in aerodynamicists from Red Bull, which supposedly is the case, if they can work out contract negotiations and if Red Bull can release those people from their contracts for next year, and they're working out sort of gardening periods. If that really is the case, I think Ferrari could do really well and hit back for next season.
I hope so.
And I think it's going to be really successful.
The classic case of next year's our year.
Yeah, Ferrari is the South Carolina Gamecocks of F1. When you think of SEC football
or the Cleveland Browns. Well, maybe not the Cleveland Browns.
And I'm just saying this because I went to South Carolina. When you think of SEC football, the team that is always like next year's our year is South Carolina. Especially when Steve Spurrier was the head coach, you know. And Ferrari's kind of like that right now. But if they can make it work and they can put all the Italian bureaucracy aside, I think that there's no reason why they can't be the best team in Formula One.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and you're right. I totally didn't even realize that, even connect with the nationality of Jean Todt, Ross Brawn, Michael Schumacher, Rubens Barrichello, who's Brazilian. I didn't.
So it'll be interesting.
Promising. I think the future is looking better for Ferrari.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, of course, we were saying that at the beginning of 2022, but we'll see what happens. I would like to move on. We're running a little bit short on time, but we have to talk about Mercedes. I'm actually going to be really harsh on them. In terms of the race, it looked like they, on paper, that's a great result. P4 and P6, that's a great result.
Yeah, but how the season started.
And P6 in qualifying for George Russell was pretty good. But P13 for Lewis Hamilton was not good.
Yeah.
And
they finished 50 seconds behind Red Bull.
Lewis Hamilton was 50 seconds behind the race lead when he ended. And even George Russell in P4 was 30 seconds behind.
Max Verstappen was closer to the back of Lewis Hamilton than Lewis Hamilton was to the back of Max Verstappen.
So it's really, so on paper it seems like a pretty okay weekend, pretty average, good damage limitation in the race. And I will say, Lewis Hamilton, once he cleared the DRS train at the beginning of the race, he was fast. But there is something clearly wrong with the car. And Toto Wolff also had a lot of negative things to say about that weekend. So I actually think that this is this is a weekend that they're just like, even when they're good, they're not, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that they're just really going to be moving on. And I think they're just ready to move on and go to Imola, get these upgrades on the car, and see how they get on.
Because Imola is in 2 weeks, so they're completely redoing their side pods.
Yeah, they're changing their side pod philosophy. They're changing a lot of things. But again, I really do think that, and this is kind of what I was going back to with, like,
I think Ferrari's doing that too.
No, not in Imola.
I think for Spain. Sorry.
But this was kind of what I was going back to with, like, everybody was always kind of a year or two behind Mercedes in their era of dominance. I think Mercedes is always going to be behind Red Bull and Ferrari. I think, and so I just think that, and that's because they're introducing this new side pod concept. Essentially, the car's going to look a little bit different, but there are still fundamental flaws with that. Like, the cockpit is closer to the front wheels. So Lewis Hamilton, he said it feels like he's sitting on top of the front wheels when he drives the car. Mm-hmm. So that's a fundamental flaw that you cannot change mid-season because the chassis are homologated. So that's going to be something that, you know, even if this upgrade works and they see an increase in pace, which Toto Wolff says that they will, that it's going to be immediate performance gain. That's what their simulator has been saying. That's what, you know, Mick Schumacher has been saying on the simulator. That's what all of the information coming out is saying, that the simulator numbers are good.
Yeah, and I trust when they say that more so than when Ferrari says that.
Well, so. I trust it less so when they said that their 2022 car was going to be eye-wateringly quicker than everybody else, and it ended up being what it was.
Yeah.
So, but that's besides the point. I think that even if the Imola upgrades are successful, they're still going to be behind the 8 ball because they're going to have to completely re-understand a different concept.
Yeah.
So I think they're going to be looking forward to it, but I still think it's going to be a long season for them. And their performance this season, while good on paper, was not good. I'm going to give them a D+.
Yeah, I was going to say D+, C-, that kind of range.
There. So it's just tough. And I think if Ferrari can put a couple really good weekends throughout the summer together, I think Ferrari has the capability of catching and passing Mercedes.
Yeah.
But now we have to go to the top two. I think this team, Aston Martin, was the most diametrically opposed performance from one teammate to another that we had all
Fernando
weekend.
Fernando Alonso finishing on the podium
and then qualifying on the front row.
Yeah, qualified on the front row, and then you had Lance Stroll. Did he even finish in the top 10? No, he didn't.
Finished 12th.
He finished 12th. So
Stroll finished 12th and qualified 18th, I think.
Yeah.
Qualified 18th and finished 12th, which is not where you want to be if you're Lance Stroll.
Yeah.
I mean that you really should be up there getting points, and really I think if there's and I said this at the beginning of the season, and I'll say it again, if there is a reason why Aston Martin's performance now doesn't last in terms of the constructor standings, and if there's a team that can catch and pass them, it's because Lance Stroll is going to have these weekends where he's not there and able to support.
And the crappy
Alonso.
part is, as long as Lawrence Stroll is the owner of that team, I don't see Lance going anywhere.
Yeah. So
it's not a great weekend for them.
Yeah.
Because it was a really great weekend for Fernando and a really poor weekend I'm going to average it out and give him a C.
I think I'm going to give him a B- purely because Fernando Alonso is him.
Yeah.
He's just him. He keeps putting in these consistent performances. His performances this year, third, fourth, third.
Yeah.
Whew. Like,
so good.
That's incredible. And when you are the second fastest team chasing Red Bull, that's where you want to be. That's where Max Verstappen was in 2020 and 2020. That's where Max Verstappen was in 2020. He was always third place to Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas. And when you are that second place team, that's where you want your lead driver to be. And that's where he is. And he's able to mix it with the top with the top teams. So I think it was such a different weekend for each side of the garage. So I'm going to give them a B-, and I give them a B- instead of a C+, because of Fernando Alonso's consistency, and it continues to prove to be that way.
Yep, I agree.
So up next is Red Bull, and I mean, I give them an A+.
Yeah,
and,
I would.
And the reason
I would give him an A. Yeah. The only reason why I'm not going to give him an A+ because, and it's not necessarily Max's fault, but he qualified 9th, but it wasn't his fault. So I mean, still great weekend. Max, I mean, clearly ran through everyone, finished first. So I'm going to give him an A.
Yeah, I give them an A+, not because I think had Max Verstappen been able to finish his final lap, he would have been on pole.
Yeah.
And the entire race, I don't know. I went back and watched the race, and the entire time I was sitting there, it wasn't like Saudi Arabia, where it was like, is Max going to catch Checo? It was, when is Max going to catch Checo? And it was never a question for me. But the reason why I still give them an A+ is because when something happens to your lead driver, Sergio Perez went and put it on pole. Like, he was able to pick up the pieces when it wasn't there. So would Max have wanted to started from pole position? Obviously, but points are awarded on Sunday, and Max was able to get it done. And I think Checo is going to be a little bit miffed that he didn't get the optimal strategy. I think the hard tires were clearly the best tire, and the Max's first stint on those hard tires was mega. So I think it was just kind of always a matter of time for Max, and for me that's just kind of why I give them an A+, because it really wasn't his own doing. I think not having the banker lap was definitely his fault, because he just wasn't able to put the lap together. But I mean,
he recovered well.
I saw. You know who the last driver to qualify 9th and win was? Niki Lauda. He's the last driver to qualify 9th and win.
Holy crap!
Now that's not. I mean, Lewis Hamilton was able to start from 10th and win in Brazil in 2021. So
that's specifically
it's a little bit. That's specifically 9th place, so it's a little bit loaded of a stat. But the last person to finish qualify 9th and win was Niki Lauda.
That's crazy. Jeez. And that was in the 70s.
Yeah. So I mean, just what can you say more about Max's performance this weekend?
Yeah.
And that's why, for me, my top performer of the week is Max Verstappen. That's the first time this season that I have said Max Verstappen is my top performer of the week.
Yeah,
I've always
I think
tried
either of us.
Because it's so easy to pick Max Verstappen.
It is.
It's so easy.
Yeah.
When he's winning, I mean, when he's the favorite to win every single weekend. So it's so easy to pick Max. But I have to give it to. If there's somebody else to give it to, I would give it to Pierre Gasly.
Yeah, I was thinking. So I don't want to copy you. I was gonna say, either Pierre Gasly or Fernando Alonso.
Yeah, I think another good option is Fernando Alonso.
I think I'm gonna go Fernando. Yeah. I think I love Fernando. But I think I'll go with Fernando. Pierre Gasly was a close second for me.
Yeah, I mean P5 in qualifying.
Yeah,
that's a mega effort.
Yeah, and then was still able to finish, in
P8.
the point P8. And it was kind of the same thing for Fernando. Qualified second, finished third. So really, really great job for both drivers. Both drivers had an incredible weekend, but I think Fernando Alonso just edges him out just a little bit. So that's my
and I picked Max because of his race and his pace throughout. It was perfectly managed. His stint on the hards was great, and that was that.
Yeah.
So that is everything for us this week. We will be back in 2 weeks for the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix.
I love that race. I'm so excited.
It's a great race. I love Imola. I think
it's a great track.
It's going to be tough to overtake, as it always is. So it's going to be a little bit boring. I think it's very similar to Hungary, in the sense that it's a naturally occurring road course. It's a natural road course. It's not a street circuit, but it kind of drives like a street circuit.
It's very tight.
But is
it a sprint weekend?
I believe
they've had the sprint weekend, the sprint race there in the past.
Let's find out. We have the technology.
I can't remember because they're doing 6 this year.
The sprint races it's Azerbaijan, Austria, Belgium, Qatar, Austin, and Brazil.
Gotcha.
So it is not a sprint weekend. Not a sprint weekend. The next sprint weekend we have is Austria, which will be June 30, July 1, July 2.
Which I'll be in Minnesota for that one.
Cool. So we'll be back in 2 weeks for our thoughts on the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix in Imola.
Well, I hope you enjoyed. Please, as always, be sure subscribe on YouTube, follow us on TikTok, on Twitter, all this stuff.
We post TikToks pretty much daily.
Yeah, we post TikToks pretty much daily, and on YouTube Shorts as well when we're not posting like full length podcast episodes. We post Shorts daily, post TikToks daily. So be sure to go follow us on all of our other socials, and we'll see ya after Imola.